From the back deck, hidden in the freezing dark, I watched my own life like it was a movie I hadn't been cast in. Inside, the lake house glowed. Firelight flickered off stone and glass, off crystal flutes and sequin dresses. Laughter swelled, low and satisfied. And at the center of it all, my father, standing near the fireplace, arm lifted in a practiced arc, champagne raised. "We spent 40 years fighting for a view like this," he boomed, his voice carrying over the hum of conversation. "And I could not be prouder that our daughter finally has a home worthy of her." He turned toward my sister. "Brittany," he said, eyes shining. "You deserve this." Applause, cheers, clinking glass. I waited, ridiculous hope gnawing at the edge of my chest, for my name. It never came. The slider was cracked open an inch, enough for the heat and noise to leak out, enough for my mother's voice to slip through, a sharp, dismissive slice under the music. "Well, what's done is done," she said. "Lauren may have signed the papers, but this is our house now." I didn't charge at the glass. I didn't bang on the door, or throw my drink, or scream like the hysterical daughter they've always warned people I could be. I just turned away. My boots made no sound on the frost-dusted boards as I walked back down the dark side of the house, past the glowing windows, past the rows of cars I'd never be able to afford if I worked overtime for a decade. Down the long, unlit driveway to my sedan. Inside, the car was a refrigerator. The air so cold it burned my lungs. My own breath drifted out in small white clouds, hanging in front of me before dissolving. I stared at my hands on the steering wheel. Steady. No shaking. No adrenaline tremor. I pressed the heel of my palm against my eyes, trying to force out some kind of reaction. Tears. Rage. Panic. Something. Nothing came. No grief. No meltdown. Just this brutal, clean clarity. Like a door slamming shut in my head. Fine, I thought. If they wanted this to be a transaction instead of a relationship, I knew how to handle those. I reached over to the passenger seat and pulled my laptop onto my knees. The glow of the screen washed the interior in pale blue, harsh and honest. I clicked past the files for my job, corporate investigations, cash flow reports, forensic audits for companies who had no idea how much money they were bleeding, and opened a spreadsheet tucked into a folder called simply Family. I'd started it at 12. Not because I was obsessed with numbers, although in hindsight, maybe I was, but because it was the only way I knew to make sense of living as the invisible beam holding up a collapsing house. Most people are raised to think love is automatic. That family bonds are sacred and unconditional. When you grow up like I did, background character, permanent understudy, you learn faster than you should that love at home is transactional. Conditional. Something you earn and pay for and sometimes never get anyway. So I'd started counting. Every mess of Brittany's I'd cleaned up to earn a rare smile. Every dollar of allowance I'd spent on presents for my mother because I'd figured out that bought me 10 minutes of undivided attention. Every holiday table I set, every argument I diffused, every time I swallowed what I wanted so they could have what they wanted. I turned all of it into entries. An emotional balance sheet. Debits and credits. Inputs and outputs. A quiet kid's attempt to put a price tag on being tolerated. Buying this lake house had been my last, biggest, non-refundable investment. My final stress test. I had thrown everything they said they wanted onto the table to see if, with their dreams delivered on a silver platter, they would finally have room left to see me. I scrolled down to the most recent line. Tonight's date. In the description column I typed, Grand Opening Party, Lake House. In the cost column, I didn't enter a dollar amount. I typed, Total erasure. The formulas updated automatically, cells shifting from black to red. The sum at the bottom blinked back at me. Account, overdrawn. For years, I'd been their silent investor. The one quietly underwriting their perfect family image while they funneled every drop of praise and affection into Brittany's account. Tonight, they'd made the mistake every bad borrower eventually makes. They assumed their line of credit was infinite. They assumed the bank me would never call the loan due. I closed the laptop. Darkness flooded back into the car, but now it didn't feel empty. It felt deliberate. I wasn't their daughter anymore, not in the way they defined it. I wasn't a desperate kid in the driveway, waiting to be let back in. I was the lender. And when a borrower defaults this spectacularly, when they show you they never intended to honor the agreement, the lender doesn't beg. The lender initiates foreclosure. Before I tell you how that played out, I want to know something from you. If you're still here, listening to this, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. I promise it's not just a random question. I like knowing who's out there when I share stories like this. It makes the next part easier to say. Because this didn't start with a fancy house or a party. It started 3 years earlier with a funeral and a number. $300,000. When my grandmother Rose died, she didn't leave her estate to her only son. She'd known him too long. Instead, she left me 2 things. The first was a decaying commercial lot in downtown Traverse City. A squat brick building with boarded windows and good bones in a part of town developers had started circling. The second was a trust. $300,000. Along with it, a letter in her shaky handwriting. Build something they can't take from you. At the time, I thought she meant a business. A building. A life outside that house. I didn't realize she also meant, they will try. While I was quietly inheriting the means to finally stand on my own, my parents were busy engineering their own disaster. They had taken everything they'd saved across 4 decades, their 401ks, home equity, lines of credit, and shoveled it into a bonfire with my sister's face on the front. Brittany's lifestyle brand. Influencer. Merchandise. Online coaching. Some vaguely spiritual, vaguely fitness thing she never fully explained but always managed to turn back to herself. When it imploded, as most businesses built entirely on vibes and credit cards do, it didn't just leave a hole. It left a crater. $450,000 of debt. Collapsed partnerships. Angry vendors. A very real possibility of bankruptcy, and a very public loss of status. Country club dinners. Charity galas. The image of being the successful Hendersons, all of it was suddenly on the line. That's when everything changed. For 25 years, I'd been the utility player. Always nearby. Rarely chosen. Then, almost overnight, I became the most important person in their universe. They didn't storm in demanding cash. They weren't that foolish. They built a trap out of warmth. It started with invitations. Come for Sunday dinner, Laura. It's been too long. Dad's grilling. We'd love to see you. Mom called me at work just to check on how things were going. She asked about my job as a forensic accountant. Actually listened as I described tracing hidden assets through shell companies and catching executives moving numbers they shouldn't. At one of those dinners, Dad raised his glass across the table and said, with theatrical pride, "This one, nodding at me. This one's the smart one. She's going places." I knew what was happening. Logically, clinically, I understood their sudden affection had a clear, simple cause. I had liquid assets. They had a crater. But when you've been starving for 20 years, and someone finally offers you the meal you've dreamed of, you don't dissect the ingredients. You eat. Later, my therapist would explain it this way. To people like my parents, love isn't an emotion. It's a bargaining chip. They weren't pretending to care, not in their own minds. They were making a down payment. An investment of attention and praise, designed to unlock mine. And it worked. I sold the commercial lot. The location made up for the condition, and a developer snapped it up. I collapsed the trust, turned my grandmother's careful planning into cash. Even that wasn't entirely enough to buy what they wanted. The lake house wasn't just a nice property. It was a fantasy. Cedar beams. Floor-to-ceiling windows. A dock that seemed to reach right into the sky. List price high enough to make seasoned realtors blink. Even with Grandma's money and the sale of the lot, there was a gap. So I reached into the only pile left that was mine alone. My savings. $150,000 I'd built reflux by reflux, paycheck by paycheck, pulling overtime while my friends went on trips and posted pictures from tropical beaches. In the end, I put in $450,000. $300 from Rose. $150 from a decade of my own work. That was the price of admission to my own family. We sat around a heavy oak table at the closing. The seller, the agent, the lawyer, a stack of documents an inch high. My father's hands actually shook when the deed came out. Not from apprehension, but from excitement. "I'll sign wherever you tell me," he said. I slid the paper back to him. "You're not signing," I said gently. "I am. I'll buy it. I'll fund the renovations. You can live here, rent-free, for the rest of your lives. But the title stays in my name. Non-negotiable." He laughed, booming and warm. "Of course," he said. "You're the financial wizard, Lauren. We trust you." He stood up and pulled me into a hug, so tight my ribs creaked. My mother cried. Actually cried. She kissed my cheek and whispered, "You saved us. You really did." For 6 months after that, as the old house was gutted and rebuilt into the one glowing behind that triple-pane glass tonight, I was basked in a light I had never known. Calls every week. Updates with genuine excitement in my parents' voices. Brittany posting couldn't do this without my genius sister in her Instagram stories. I let myself believe for a while that I'd finally paid whatever invisible bill they'd been holding over my head, that we were square, that I'd purchased a permanent seat at the table. Standing there in my car, the party at full tilt behind me, it hit me like ice water. I hadn't bought a home. I had leased a fantasy. And tonight the lease was up. They'd taken the keys. Changed the story. Invited an audience to celebrate their comeback, while the person who actually paid for it sat in the dark. I killed the engine, stepped back out into the cold, and shut the door. Gravel crunched under my boots like breaking bones as I walked back up the drive. Row upon row of polished SUVs and sedans lined the snow-rimmed gravel. People who'd never had to explain a missing $12 discrepancy to an angry CFO in their lives. The front door was unlocked. Of course it was. This was their stage now. I pushed it open. Heat slammed into me, thick with wood smoke, expensive perfume, and the buttery smell of hors d'oeuvres I'd also paid for. Voices. Laughter. The soft clink of glass against glass. I stood in the entryway and watched strangers admire my parents' beautiful home. Not one of them looked twice at me. They ran hands along the banister I'd ordered, complimented the reclaimed beams I'd selected, bragged about Bob's eye for detail. I was a ghost in my own house. Until my mother saw me. Her eyes narrowed, quick scan of the room to see who else had noticed. When she was satisfied only she had clocked me, she crossed the distance in sharp, furious strides, silk dress whispering around her ankles. She did not hug me. She grabbed my elbow so hard her manicured nails bit into my skin. "You're late," she hissed under her breath. "And you look like you came from a wake." "I did," I said mildly. "Mine." She ignored that. "Come over here," she said, steering me toward a darker corner behind the staircase, away from the glow. "Listen to me very carefully. Brittany is having a delicate night. She needs this. Do not ruin it. Do not start telling people about your involvement. It confuses them. Just get a drink and smile." My involvement. $450,000 and the deed in my safe, reduced to a little contribution she could be bothered to acknowledge. Before I could respond, metal chimed against crystal. The room quieted at the sound. My father stood near the fireplace, spoon in hand, tapping his champagne flute. The perfect image of a self-made patriarch. Tan, silver hair, custom suit, smile turned up just enough to look humble, not smug. "Friends," he said, voice warm and full. "Family. You all know the last few years have tested us. The market, the economy. It's been brutal. But the Hendersons don't go down. We reinvest. We reinvent." Polite laughter. Knowing nods. "And tonight," he continued, gesturing around, "I am proud to say that our strategy has paid off." A ripple of applause. I stayed in the shadows and watched him steal my story. He stretched out a hand. "Brit, sweetheart, come here." Brittany stood up from the velvet ottoman where she'd been holding court. She swanned over, all glossy hair and dewy makeup. She genuinely did look beautiful. She always had. That was her entire job. "Everyone knows," Dad said, putting an arm around her shoulder, "that after the divorce, our girl has been rebuilding. Starting fresh is hard. But when you believe in family, really believe in it, you do what it takes." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small set of keys. They jingled in the light. "We wanted to give you something solid," he said. "A foundation. So we have a surprise." It wasn't for the main house. It was for the detached guest cottage, a two-bedroom A-frame by the trees that I'd spent months turning into a charming rental unit so the income could cover property taxes. "We are giving you the lodge," he announced. "Permanently. It's yours. Deed and all. You will never have to worry about a roof over your head again." The crowd erupted. Whistling, cheering, people dabbing eyes like they were watching a Hallmark movie come to life. Brittany squealed, jumped up and down, threw her arms around his neck. "You're the best, Daddy," she sobbed. "You always take care of me." My mother wiped at the corner of her eye in what might have been the first sincere emotion all night. Glasses raised, toasts shouted. To Bob. To family. They were applauding a theft. He was gifting real estate he did not own to a daughter who had never held a paycheck longer than it took to post it, while the person whose name was on every legal document watched from the dark. Our eyes met across the room, just for a second. He didn't flinch. He didn't look apologetic. Or caught. He looked through me. And in that moment, I understood, deep and final, that in his mind, I didn't exist as a person at all. I was a line item, a resource. And from his perspective, that resource had been fully exploited. That was the miscalculation. He thought I was a ghost. He forgot I was the owner. I reached into my bag and felt for the manila folder I'd brought with me. The paper edge was cool and clean against my fingers. Enough observing. Time to present the findings. Ugh. My heels echoed on the hardwood as I stepped out of the corner and into the center of the room. The same hand-scraped oak I'd chosen, laid, and paid for. "Actually," I said, raising my voice just enough to carry, "I think there might be a little mix-up." The applause faltered. Heads turned. My father's smile froze mid-brag. My mother's eyes went wide. "Lauren," she said through clenched teeth, striding toward me, panic dressed up as poise. "Not now. We'll discuss this later." "No," I said calmly, not looking at her. "We won't. This isn't a family chat. This is an audit." I walked right past her to the stone fireplace. Above it, the massive 85-inch TV that had been Dad's one actual contribution hung like a blank canvas. The jazz playlist I'd curated months ago for our housewarming was still playing quietly through the speakers. I pulled the HDMI cable from the media console with a soft click. The music cut out mid-saxophone. Uneasy silence rushed in. "What are you doing?" my father demanded, voice cracking at the edges. "You're making a scene. You're ruining your sister's night." I opened my laptop, plugged in the cable. "I'm correcting the record," I said. The screen on the wall flickered to life. Not a slideshow of childhood photos. Not a sentimental video. A legal document. Blown up so large that the letters were the size of my hand. Warranty deed. It read across the top. Underneath, in bold, "Grantee Lauren Henderson." My name hung over the heads of my parents' friends like a verdict. "You were all kind enough to listen to my father's investment story," I said, turning to face the room, sweeping my gaze over the bankers, the club board members, the old friends whose opinions he valued more than mine by a factor of 1,000. "So I thought you deserved the full report." My mother lunged for the laptop. "Turn it off," she snapped. "You're upsetting Brittany." "This is tacky." "Sit down," I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. Something in the way I said it, the flat, controlled tone I use when presenting findings to a CEO who's about to learn his own VP robbed him blind, stopped her cold. She stared at me like she'd never seen me before. I turned back to the guests. 3 years ago, I said, pointer sliding across my trackpad, the Hendersons weren't temporarily weathering the market. They were on the verge of Chapter 7 bankruptcy. The next slide popped up, a simple table. Assets. Liabilities. Net worth. In the liabilities column, $450,000 marked as business loans tied to Brittany's LLC. In an attempt to launch Brittany's lifestyle brand, I continued, my parents mortgaged their retirement, drained savings, and took out loans they couldn't hope to repay. The business failed. The debt did not. A murmur moved through the room. I clicked again. Enter my grandmother Rose, I said. She left a trust of $300,000, and a commercial property in Traverse City. To me, not to them. Copies of the will appeared on screen. My name highlighted in bright yellow. I liquidated that trust, I said. I sold the lot. I added $150,000 from my own career, a decade in forensic accounting. That's $450,000 in total, for those of you at the back. A few uncomfortable chuckles. Mostly silence. With that money, I purchased this house. I paid for the renovations. In exchange, my parents were given lifetime use. Rent-free. On one condition, the deed stays in my name. I glanced at my father. He had gone from tan to gray. So when Robert says, "We bought this place," I concluded, turning back to the room, what he means is I did. Every legal document agrees. I advanced to the next slide. An email from the title company, my name in the owner field. And when he says he's gifting the lodge to Brittany, I added, he is generously attempting to give away something he does not legally own. To someone who, no offense Britt, has a documented history of defaulting on six-figure obligations. Keys clattered to the floor by the fireplace. Brittany stood frozen, tears still glittering on her cheeks, mouth open. "You're twisting this," my mother burst out. "It's family money. Spiritual ownership. Legal paperwork is just formality. Of course it's all of ours. We always meant that. It's not the forms that are the problem," I said. "It's the fraud." Her face crumpled, anger eclipsing fear. My father tried to jump in, voice blustering back. "I'm the one who found the property," he said. "I negotiated. I oversaw the renovations. Do you honestly think the IRS cares whose name is on what? This is our retirement home. We had an agreement." "We did," I said. "You'd stay here. Quietly. Peacefully. No schemes. No business. No playing games with my investment." I walked back to the laptop. "Except," I said, "you couldn't help yourselves, could you?" One more keystroke. The TV image shifted again. This time, it wasn't a spreadsheet. It was a screenshot from a site half the room recognized instantly. Airbnb. Listing title, Lakeside Manor, Ultra-Luxury Retreat. Host, Brittany H. Nightly rate, $2,500. A chorus of low, shocked exclamations flowed through the crowd. Faces turned from the screen to the walls around them, as if seeing the house for the first time as paying customers instead of honored guests. "For the last year," I said, while telling me this was their quiet place to grow old, "my family has been running an unlicensed, commercial operation out of my home." I clicked again. A scrolling booking calendar appeared, nearly every weekend blocked out for months in advance. "Every weekend I wasn't here," I continued, "they rented it to strangers. Without my consent. On a property zoned residential. Insured as a private dwelling." My father's jaw clenched. He knew exactly what that meant. He'd sold policies himself once back in the day. "And the income," I said, highlighting a line of text on the screen, "did not go toward the mortgage. Or taxes. Or upkeep." Another slide. Bank statements with highlighted transfers. "All rental proceeds were routed through an LLC in Brittany's name," I said. "Money pulled from an asset she does not own. That's not family pooling resources. That's misappropriation." "You hacked me," Brittany exploded, finally finding her voice. "You violated my privacy. That's my small business. I worked so hard for those reviews." "You can't hack something sitting on the public internet," I replied. "You advertised my house as your brand. You filmed content here. You exposed my property to liability I never agreed to." I turned back to the crowd one more time. "This isn't a spat over who brings dessert to Thanksgiving," I said. "This is fraud. If one of these rental guests slipped on that icy dock out there, if a fire started in that kitchen, my insurance would be void. I'd be the one." "It's simple," I said into the quiet. "The party is over. Everyone needs to leave." "You can't do this," my mother cried. The performance mask disintegrated, leaving a woman who suddenly looked a decade older. "We are your parents. You can't throw us out. This is our home." "You said so. You'd really call the sheriff on your own family?" my father added, his voice wobbling between threat and plea. "Think about how that will look. Think about what people will say." I said. A lot. He tried one last angle. Be reasonable, Lauren. We can fix this, he said. We'll put your name on the rental account. We'll draw up papers. You can have a cut. We're talking about profit here. Passive income. Even at the end, think about how that will look. Think about what people will say. I said. A lot. He tried one last angle. Be reasonable, Lauren. We can fix this, he said. We'll put your name on the rental account. We'll draw up papers. You can have a cut. We're talking about profit here. Passive income. Even at the end, he was trying to sell me my own asset. A tiny worn-out part of me. The old version, the child desperate not to be too much, whispered, maybe this is enough. Maybe if you take control of the Airbnb, if you restructure it, you can keep them close. Supervise them. Make it work. Then another, louder voice answered. What if you'd given them what they wanted 3 years ago? What if David had bullied you into putting his name on the deed for tax reasons? What if tonight, when he dangled those keys in front of Brittany, you had no piece of paper in a folder and no legal standing? You'd be standing in this same room, watching your father gift your house to your sister. And there would be nothing you could do. You'd be $450,000 in the hole. No deed. No leverage. No audience. Just a code in your hand and a long, dark driveway ahead of you. Do you think, for 1 second, they would have chosen you over the show? They wouldn't have hesitated. The thought didn't just dissolve my guilt. It incinerated it. I'm not evicting my parents, I said. I'm exercising my rights as the sole owner of this property. My voice was as flat and cold as the ice piling up on the deck outside. You have 1 hour to pack your personal belongings, I said. After that, anyone still in this house without my permission is a trespasser, and I will call the sheriff. You wouldn't, Brittany said, but she was already edging toward the stairs, clutching her handbag. I met her eyes. I'm a forensic accountant, Britt, I said. I cut out rot for a living. Please don't make me prove it again. That broke the spell. Guests began to move, quietly at first, then in a hurry. Murmured goodbyes. Mumbled apologies. Eyes deliberately skimming past my parents as though proximity might be contagious. Within minutes, the driveway that had been jammed with cars was a slow-moving procession of taillights, disappearing into the snow. Upstairs, doors slammed. Suitcases thumped. Raised voices leaked through vents. 60 minutes later, the house was silent. No jazz. No laughter. No photoasts. Just the wind knifing against the windows. I stood alone in the middle of the great room, beneath the vaulted ceiling I'd chosen from a design catalog, surrounded by furniture I'd picked and paid for. I should have felt triumphant. I'd just reclaimed a $1.5 million asset and exposed a fraud in front of every person whose opinion had ever mattered to my father. Instead, all I felt was done. This wasn't a sanctuary. It was a crime scene. Every surface hummed with the residue of their entitlement. Every beam held the echo of their lies. I realized in that quiet that I couldn't live here. Not one night. The next morning, I called a realtor. The market in Traverse City was on fire. Waterfront properties like this were being snapped up by out-of-state buyers with cash and no questions. Within 2 weeks, we had a full-price offer, plus some. I signed the sale documents in a strip mall office with neutral walls and bad coffee. When the wire hit my account, I paid off every cent of my student loans. I opened a retirement account no one knew about but me. I set aside a cushion my parents could never touch, because they didn't even know it existed. Then I sat in the bank parking lot and pulled out my phone. 3 missed calls from Dad. A long scrolling text from Mom about forgiveness and how family is all we have. A furious block of venom from Brittany, calling me heartless, ungrateful, a monster for destroying her life. I didn't craft a reply. I didn't send a long explanation or a final manifesto. I went into settings, found each of their names, and pressed block. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was the first peaceful sound I'd ever heard. That night, at home in my small, comparatively boring apartment, I opened my laptop one more time, scrolled to the bottom of the family spreadsheet. In the description column, under the previous grand opening total erasure line, I added a final entry. Disposition of asset or sale complete. In the cost column I typed, contact terminated. The formula's adjusted. Balance, 0. For the first time in my life, the ledger was clean. The account was closed. If you've ever had to shut down a toxic relationship, family, partner, friend, to save your own sanity and future, I want you to hear this. You are not an ATM. You are not a bottomless resource. You are not selfish for refusing to keep funding a story that erases you. If this hit close to home, share your own version in the comments if you feel safe doing it. And if you want more stories like this, where people finally use the receipts they've been collecting, stick around. You're not alone.